So, hello and welcome to probably the last video we're doing this year. This is just a deconstruction, literal deconstruction of a patch I've been playing with. So, just to see what's going on. It's many different parts, so let's start with the simplest. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to tear it down as we go on, and hopefully that will make later things a bit more clear. So the first thing I want to talk about is the top part. So we have wonkystuff RBSS and the grains module. The grains module is loaded with the spell or speak firmware, simply using the CV out of the RBSS, driving the word select or whatever it's called, input 1 of the spell or speak, and input 3 is driven from the clock out of the RBSS, and input 3 is the thing that actually triggers a word to be spoken. The clock out also obviously is triggering the input of the RBSS. All this means is that every time the clock ticks, you get a new word, as you can hear. So I speed it up, we'll get more frequent words.
Fire. Bar. Boat. Console. Fourth. Fifth. As. Blue. Computer. Face.
So that's pretty straightforward, I think. Very minimal setup. No matter how fast you make the RBSS go, there's like a limit to the number of words we can speak. Okay, so let's take those patch wires out. Okay. The next part of this patch we'll look at is the random clicky bits. So this uses the tangible wave noise module with the CR, which I guess is clock rate output. Clock rate output drives another RBSS module, and then use the audio out of RBSS into a mixer and then into the multi-effects module. So as you can hear, there are these sort of random clicks. Now, the reason I'm going through the RBSS is that if we just listen to the CR output, so let's just disconnect and connect it into the mixer for the moment. So for the noise module, you can change the rate at which these clock pulses are generated. But as you can hear, the clock pulses are sort of, although they're random in time, they're uniform in amplitude. And the tone changes quite a lot between fast and slow. So let's repatch this to the clock input of the RBSS. And now we have random amplitudes as well. And the tone doesn't change with the speed. Now, one of the key parts of this particular patch is the multi-effects unit, and I've set that up for the shimmer effect. So if we dial the shimmer effect in, we can hear that nice bit of reverb, adds a bit of life to the thing. So again, that's quite a simple part of the patch, but yeah, quite like that one. Let's tear that one down as well. So the next part of the patch is the opening drone. Now this is simply the FMOS, however you pronounce it, oscillator on a fixed frequency, with the depth CV being controlled by a slow moving LFO. So you can speed it up here to hear it a bit more clearly. And the multiplier CV being driven from another RBSS. So if we speed this up, we'll be able to hear its effect. And then occasionally you flip between sine and triangle waves for a slightly different timbre. But of course that on its own is fairly flat, so we throw it through the shim verb and we get some really nice harmonics popping out. And playing with the controls of the multi-effects, you can get variations on this, of course. Even driving it into some kind of feedback. So yeah, I quite like that slowly evolving FM effect there. And yeah, obviously the multi-effects is adding a lot of extra harmonic interest. So, time to tear that down. If I choose the right patch chords. There's no filters or anything, that's straight. That output is not is direct. Now we can move on to the sequenced elements. So the first one of which is actually driven from my 808. So it has a MIDI interface, so as well as sending clock signals, it also sends a MIDI note on and a note off for each of the drum sounds which are sounding. So using a self-retriggering envelope, we can have the sound fading in and out. It's going through the wasp filter. Let's open that out. So you can obviously hear the different notes, which are corresponding to the drum sounds, but also the self-triggering or self-re-triggering envelope is fading the thing in and out. Of course, we can make this go faster if we set the attack and decay shorter. And let's leave them as relatively long. So as I say, it's going through the wasp filter. Now the filter cutoff is being triggered, is being modified by both the envelope output and also the second LFO through the matrix mixer. So at the moment this is using the envelope output to modulate the frequency of the filter as well as the amplitude. So if we shorten these so we can come down a bit quicker. So there's no modulation here. We can dial up a little bit here. So in addition to this, or as an alternative, we can use LFO1, which in this case is running relatively fast. And you can use a combination of the two, of course. So that's generally waving in and out in the background of the patch. Again, through the shimmer preset of the multi-effects. Now the idea with this patch was to keep things keep the modulation sort of unsynchronized, which is why I'm using the repeating envelope and LFOs all set to different values. So we get things fading in and out at hopefully interesting or unexpected times. Because if it's all too rigid, then it becomes quite boring. So the sound source for this was just a square wave output of the 2OSC D, as I say, feeding into the wasp filter. The output of the wasp filter goes into the second VCA, and that amplitude is controlled by envelope 2. So that's probably enough of that. Let's deconstruct that. Now to the final part of the patch, which is a piece this is sequenced all within the Tangible Waves modular itself. So we have, as I said before, we've got a 808 connected, so that's sending MIDI clock. That's going to the master module. The clock is being divided by the beat divider. The tempo is really quite slow, so the beat division isn't very much here. The output of that clock is going into the trigger 164 and also the sequencer 16. I've also wired up the start signal to reset of the beat divider, trigger sequencer and the sequencer, so that everything resets from step 1 at the start. So if I hit start, lots of flashing lights. Now, a little rundown of what actually happens here. So the trigger sequencer, I can click notes and it triggers a sequence, a note. Now the note that it sequences is actually the currently active note on the analog sequencer here. So if we put in a new note, so we can build up a melody of sorts from the sequencer 16. Now this took a bit of thinking about, so you can tell that you can see that the sequence is moving to different notes throughout the decay period of these notes. What I've had to do is use the sample and hold to effectively freeze the value of the CV here. So let's say if we, instead of using that, if we used the CV directly, so here we're triggering the envelope, but you can hear that the CV is constantly moving. So a little bit of jiggery pokery with the logic one we're using here, and so the gate output from the sequencer and the trigger output here, and use that as a trigger input to the sample and hold. So doing it like this, we can build up the sequence like this, and then if we bring the decay, as we get more notes, we can bring the decay down to make them more distinct. As you can hear, the output of the VCO is going through, so it's using a square wave output here, going through the SV filter, that's being modulated by the same envelope that is modulating the VCA. So that's quite flat, so you give it a bit of life, and then that's going through the lo-fi delay, which means you can turn the feedback up and get some textures and all that sort of stuff. So the only other thing on the VCO, what have we got? We've got the mod input being driven by this LFO, and that's set to PWM. So again, it's just, it adds a little bit of life to the waveform coming out of the VCO. So the actual synth voice is relatively conventional: oscillator, SV filter, envelope, VCA. Just the slightly interesting part is this sequencer using the sample and hold to freeze the values. And if you select all the notes, you can hear them. the sequencer to 8 steps instead, just to have the top line being repeated. And that's it. That was the whole patch. Hope that was vaguely interesting. Let's see what I can come up with next with all these wires out of the way. Bye for now.